Can everyone see my screen? Okay. All right. Yeah. Oh, so welcome again, everyone, to the Gaming Guild, and this is our third session. And today we're very grateful to Ryan for joining us. Ryan is, of course, also a Kernel Fellow, a Kernel Block 4, and we're happy to have him join us again and talk Kernel again. So Kernel, of course, is always about these horizontal conversations where we all learn from each other. And whenever I talk to Ryan, it's always a learning experience. And of course, he's a good friend, so it's good to see him again. And I guess let's start with just introducing the kernel sessions again, gaming guild sessions. So Ryan, something new that we're doing this time is we made it more structured. There's actually 7 sessions altogether, and this is the third one. The first ones were focused more on getting people to start building, like really get their hands dirty with smart contracts, and then with games. So we had Austin Griffith, like last time, talk about smart contracts. On the second session, we had Richard Davey from Phaser talk about Phaser and what can be done with that. And now we have you joining us to talk more about the theory of tokens and GameFi and game design. I would say it's now that we know how to build things. Now let's figure out how the underlying game design works, right? So that will be the crux of what we'll be discussing today. And just to discuss what the Kernel Fellows are again. So all of us here know each other, but it just bears repeating that people from Kernel are three-dimensional humans who live incredibly uh, multiple lives. So we're not just engineers, right? A lot of the people we talk to here in Kernel are artists as well. They're educators, they're policy makers. So it's good that we have this diversity of thought to really know what we should be building and to kind of really see that we're not talking in echo chambers and want Web3 to matter to the people that we are building them for. And for the gaming guild in particular, what we want to learn here is something pretty particular, I would say. One quote that I wrote here is creating future games of Web3 beyond play to earn. You know, play to earn is I guess, the strongest narrative right now with crypto games. You see it in, of course, games like Crypto Raiders, which Ryan has helped on and has created. Aavegotchi, Dark Forest, Conquest ETH, Wolf Game, and these big projects like Star Atlas. But we kind of want to see what's next, right? Like we want to discuss what Web3 can provide, especially having that kernel mindset of what do we need to build in this current I guess, environment that we are in. And I guess now we can discuss Ryan. So maybe I can talk a little bit about you, Ryan, and then you can add a bit of intro on your end as well. But I did mention Ryan is Kernel Block 4. He's currently gaming part of the games team at Delphi Digital, and he writes very lucidly on metaverses, and of course he worked on Crypto Raiders. So I think he's the perfect guest to have for us to discuss game design, to discuss how to create GameFi games, and just the landscape of what GameFi games are out there. And yeah, Ryan, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a good kind of overview of what we're going to talk about today. I guess we're going to speak a bit more about games really as games as products and really the business of games and how that's really transforming with the new primitives that we have, with blockchain, with tokens, with NFTs, right? How do we change the way we make games and, even potentially change the type of experiences that players can have, right? Because of, these new primitives that we have. So I think that's kind of that'd be an interesting start and a way to kind of frame our discussion for the type of game experiences you want to make. Yeah. So that's all I have to say. Yeah. As for perhaps Delphi Digital, I can speak a bit more about like what we do there. Right. So we basically we started as a research company, right? But then I think particularly related to games, it really kind of started with helping out Axie Infinity's token design and YGG's as well, and also investing on the venture side. So Delphi has sort of had a strong presence in crypto gaming, and I think continuing also to support like next generation of crypto games through investment and also just kind of helping with tokenomics and the like. So day to day, I look at different games as potential investments and also like ways that we can help design the tokenomics alongside them, right? In the game economies as well, like help sub prod and poke a little bit. And I think help usher, the web 2 into web 3 in a sense as well, which I think, Paul is also kind of tackling with OP games. So yeah, I think we're allied on that front. Like, yeah, so I think that's kind of an intro to Delphi Digital. And yep, the background is writing code, software engineer, but also like write a bunch of words online. Mention metaverses.
Metaverses. Yeah.
I really kind of got started with that like in July last year, right? And that was just writing about Plato and whilst observing, and then really kind of hoping like writing about what there's some nascent ideas that would kind of sprout and hit the mainstream on like what is sort of play ender, and what does it mean to like own your digital assets, like how can NFTs sort of help in the fundraising process. So like adding some sort of framing around like the utility that these new primitives can have towards like game developers, right, in particular, right, and investors too. So I think it's all about aligning incentives. I don't know, will we stay on this slide or I'm like a bit like, oh yeah.
This is kind of like the meandering conversation. So I actually have I guess it's not very structured after the next slide. Like we can, if you have some slides that you want to use, Ryan, we can do that. But I think a conversation would be good as well, and we can involve the people who want to ask questions.
Yeah, I think that's I think like having a conversation is completely fine, and I'm also happy to go through slides. I'm just like kind of like, oh my yeah, what's up?
Yeah, sure. Okay, and then this is my last slide actually before we kind of go into it, and this is something that we're doing pretty new with the gaming guild, because I guess for the first few sessions we had weren't kernel fellows, and you of course you're a kernel fellow, and we're you know that kernel is really about waxing philosophical around what games and play mean, right, and about what web3 and value means. Um, so I guess I wanted to talk a little bit with you to start with this. If you haven't looked at the Kernel Gaming Guild syllabus in a while, Andy actually updated it.
Great.
And I wanted to share this with everyone. If they haven't gone through the kernel community syllabus very much, or an Easter egg, I would say, like Andy likes doing this. When you look at the headers, that there's a phrase there that he kinds of wants to impart to us, right? So for the gaming guild, he wrote this: trusting play to create value freely and infinitely. And I guess I want to one of the things that starts the gaming guild syllabus also is something around value, which is where we say that without tracing the whole history, one can see how our ability to create value has always been tied to the ways in which we tell stories about and with our shared records. So that's something we've kind of realized with Web3, right? That a lot of a lot of the words that we lean on, like value, has changed. We don't know what value is in a world where anyone can create tokens. And I guess one of the messages that kernel was to impart is value is about these shared records. It's about mutual agreement on what value is. And I know, Ryan, that you read the book Virtual Economies by Lidon Berta and Castronova. Oh, nice. So can you show that up again so that people can see? So I suggest people read this book as well, Virtual Economies. It's something that I've learned a lot from how to design virtual economies, or what it really means for us to make value when everything has no value, right? When everything is virtual. So one thing that stood out there was this quote: economic processes such as production, logistics, and trade are not simply means towards ends, but can also be fun in themselves. Game content that does not always have to be inspired by adventure and combat. It can also be about trade and industry. So I guess, Ryan, I know you've read the book as well. Is there something in the book you would suggest for us um, to I guess to really understand? Because I know like designing tokenomics and virtual economies are very 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 related, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I think to start the conversation on the book, right? Like, I think
Mhm.
the core thing that is best to kind of take away from from this book is related to sort of the concept of virtual goods, right? And like, understanding virtual goods and like how they're created and then why do they have value to certain individuals and different type of groups, right? Because like that is how like value enters the system, and that's how like players begin to kind of begin I think sort of tracing back to the first kind of quote on the side right there, right? How value is created actually becomes um like when you create these virtual goods, like players ascribe value to these virtual goods, even if the marginal cost of creation is zero and the like for these goods, so to speak. Like, and I think trying really understanding like sort of the driving factors behind like why people want to sort of spend on these things, whether it be like sort of conspicuous consumption, like status, right? Which is what we're seeing with a lot of the sort of 10,000 PFP NFT projects, right? A lot of that value, a lot of that reason why players are willing to spend in these economies, right? Willing to kind of like give up like medium of exchange, the currencies for these assets because of scarcity and because of like status driven by scarcity and mutual recognition of that the status, right? So I think sort of seeing the different ways in which status can accrue. That's one. I think second is like different way, and then more broadly, value can accrue to these different sort of virtual goods. Then sort of sets up in a much better position to design utility that makes sense in the context of our game, right? So I think that there is like sort of the narrative part of it, right? But then like if you look at it as a pure kind of model, and it's like, well, why do people want this in the first place? Or how do I create this feeling where players want this asset? And that's where you really start, right? Creating the demand side, I suppose. So I think sort of understanding the drivers of value for virtual goods is really what you should sort of hammer down on when reading this book.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess that's something worth thinking about because when people make tokens, a lot of them um, just just are focusing on that token sale, right? And utility is sometimes something that don't people don't think about, especially with the PFPs, of course. And
Yeah.
the challenge is people are buying it regardless because of the speculation, right? So what
Yeah.
happens next? Yeah,
And it's interesting because coming back to kernel is all about intention, right? Like I think like understanding what the intention is of the buyer, of the player, of are they coming to spend? Are they coming to speculate? Are they coming to invest in a vision? Are they coming to enjoy and have fun in the game system? Like being able to like bucket like these different sort of like player motivations will go a long way to kind of leading to a more sustainable economy, because it's almost like understanding like your market, so to speak, right? And then that helps you to better forecast like the demand and the supply for the tokens and the different kind of like assets in your game economy, which is again, I mentioned a lot of times economy because it's all about like, I mean, with blockchain, it's not a sort of solo thing, right? It's a blockchain in this case is at least related to games. Most often is used to kind of help facilitate transactions within between individuals in the game system. So I think that's why we kind of keep harkening back to like value and economy in this conversation. But yeah.
cool, yeah, and I guess also this is something new if you haven't read it on the Kernel Gaming Guild. So Andy added this article by David Grieber on what's the point if you can't have fun. Have you seen
Yeah.
that one, Ryan?
Yeah, I remember you shared that one. Yeah, I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing that was very interesting to me there was that like we know what makes something fun as game designers, right? Like it's all about the retention hooks, it's all about the randomness, right? When we're surprised we have fun. So what one thing that Grieber mentions there is what we can't explain is why fun is fun, right? So it's more about what I guess he kind of goes deeper into the question and asking like, do for example, do insects or ants have fun, or do electrons dance? So it's very fascinating where he kind of takes it to the limit, right? Where he kind of says that like fun and play is what makes something human, or what makes us human is that option of freedom. So he says that, is it meaningful to say an electron chooses to jump the way it does if one does not wish to treat the mind as some supernatural entity imposed on the material world, but rather as simply a more complex organization of processes that are already going on at every level of material reality? Then it makes sense that something at least a little like intentionality, something at least a little like experience, something at least a little like freedom would have to exist on every level of physical reality as well. So so it's a very fascinating read. His point there is like even atoms play, right? Like the concept of play and freedom, and just that choosing to do something is something fundamental, right? So so yeah, so I know you're a kernel fellow, Ryan, so it's it's okay for us to talk very philosophically. So what so is there anything there that speaks to you, like how do you think that electrons dance, that ants play? So it's a question that I pose to other people as well.
Yeah, I guess kind of going back to, this frame, right? This failure of the evolutionary psychology, the frame of evolutionary psychology to capture like, non like behavior that's not like directly tied to, us successfully reproducing, so to speak, right? Like the frame isn't able to capture like play, for example, right? Because play is kind of, there is like some, and this is from the article, right, as well, right? Like there are some kind of like evolutionary reasons why folks play. Like, you might play with others in order to, better socialize, right? Or second, like, build bonds. Third, like practice skills like catching mice together, like play acting in mice in combat and all that.
Mhm,
But I
mhm,
think like, even outside of sort of the skills that we learn, like I think play almost implies like a lack of need to take that action, right? And I think like I don't know if like sort of the discussion of like sort of freedom and like, sort of determinism really kind of comes in here, or it's like directly relevant here. I do think like the ability to sort of play and kind of step outside, I guess, the frame of one's life for a while. And I guess this also sort of ties to immersion, right? And that's why a lot of people love games. Like not everybody loves games for that reason, but a lot of people do, right? Then yeah, I think sort of mentioning that it is kind of like uniquely human to get obsessed in this kind of ways is interesting, right? Um, I know this kind of goes into entire and could potentially veer into entire discussion about sort of like anthropocentrism and the like, but yeah,
mhm.
let's definitely like steer it back more towards games, because like
Yeah.
I'm definitely not an expert in, I'm only a pop sociologist and
Yeah.
philosopher, but yeah,
No,
like I think talking about economic processes like the second bubble, you know what I mean, like great
I know.
example
Yeah.
of like
I
games
guess
that,
I also wanted to. Yeah, I wanted to break that up also, just to get our minds thinking a little bit. I know Kernel kind of does that for us, right? Like just try to look at something from a different point of view. So
yeah,
yeah, so
I
mostly just to stir up conversation there. But yeah, I agree also that that play, it really is I guess something that as humans do to get out of the current reality, as you said, and try to explore new things, right? So yeah.
yeah,
um
so like sort of
uh
stepping out the current
so
bounds. Yeah, and almost crypto is pretty inherently playful as well, right? Like
mm,
I find like, there's a lot of like joyfulness in virtual community, just kind of like sort of playing around with new sort of primitives, new ways of, accomplishing different things, or same, even the same things, right? In a way that isn't so constrained with like this kind of like almost baggage of history, so to speak. And then of course you have to relearn the lessons of history, but like yeah, nonetheless, there's a kind of like joyful irreverence, I suppose, for rules, which is interesting kind of aspect of crypto as well to kind of note. Yeah, but that's definitely more so broad than game design. Yeah, I think the second quote there, like talking about economic processes such as production, logistics, and trade, they're not simply means towards ends, but can be fun in themselves, right? It's not always going to be sort of adventure and combat. And I think like there are some games that like have kind of expressed this, like games like indie games like Undertale and the like express like alternative paths to a satisfying game experience without combat, right? But I think the one that most captures my imagination, at least at this point, with a sort of successful core gameplay loop, like retention loop, right? As you mentioned earlier, like why players will stick around to continue playing and getting better and better and better at the game, right? And one of these games is actually Everdale, like which I really highly
Yeah.
recommend trying out, right? Because it's Clash of Clans, but without like the clashing. So it's just like clans, right? You just like
Yeah.
kind of show up, you drop into a village, you manage this village and its resources. It's like Age of Empires level micro, and you send out all your little like sort of villagers to pick up like wood and like food and make food and the like, right? And then
Yeah,
after a certain
I
level,
remember you
you
shared that with me, and then I played it for quite a while and had to stop. Like,
yeah, you have to stop because
yeah,
it's like horrendously addictive because of the
yeah,
social aspects, right? I was
mhm.
waking up at like 8 a.m. being like, oh crap, like I gotta check out my villagers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like yeah, I had to stop as well. But I do think like it is kind of a promising example of like games that aren't kind of centered around like this sort of desire for conquest or like
Yeah.
sort of yeah power fantasy and the like, right? It's just like, hey, I'm have a village and I'm hanging out with a bunch of other people, and let's talk about like trade, right? Because in sort of microeconomics we talk about trade. It's like always a favorable trade between two players, right? Two people, right? Two willing
Mhm.
parties. Like no one like trades a bit like value is created when one trades, right? Because like you have one banana, I have two apples, I get utility from having like one banana, one apple. You do too. You know what I mean? We don't want to eat apples all day, right? So
Mhm.
stuff like that, like basic economic lessons like that can be taught through these kind of games, right? And I think like
Mhm.
the process of learning, and I'm quoting Ralph Costa here on like learning as an engine for like games as an engine for learning, right? Like I think like that's a really compelling way of I guess beginning to ideate games that are more kind of yeah, like outside of the sort of traditional like, hey, take a sword and kill this thing and then maybe you get some money, right?
Mhm.
But to be fair, we worked on games that are like that. So
Yeah.
what am I?
I know. Yeah. I guess that's the natural thing, right? Like in
Yeah,
blockchain games, uh, like people design because of the medium. I feel like, for example, you see Dark Forest, you see Conquest ETH, and I just saw one Orbiter 8, I think,
yeah,
that are
space
exact
specifically.
mostly the same space game and planet game, right? And mining
Yeah,
game.
yeah.
So it's because
Star
of the
Atlas.
medium, right? Star Atlas. There you go.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
futuristic money.
Mm-hmm.
Magic Internet money deserves Magic Internet games. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So to be
Mm-hmm.
fair, but
Yeah.
I do think like the space for a lot outside of that. But I understand why like you kind of begin like by developing like these kind of games with I won't say like very high legibility, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
you can look at it in 1 second and you'd be like, yeah, this is exactly the kind of game it will be. I know exactly the type of gameplay that I'll expect. You know what I mean? If I
Yeah.
see like a space game, I'm like, yeah, I'll click around planets and I'll use these planets to make more money and expand my control over the galaxy and so on and so on, right? With characters, if there's like RPG, you have a character, you kill a bunch of things, you level up, you collect stuff, kill more things, level up again. It's like not much variance there. So I think the innovation really comes from like outside of that core loop, right? And this is kind of where it gets interesting because like I think you kind of keep that core loop. So this is like sort of the first sort of step for I think for crypto games, right? Where you kind of keep that core loop, right? And then you build like all these economic systems around that core loop, right? And the core loop is just the action that they perform. So an example of a successful, or at least you can debate a bit on this, but then the numbers kind of check out, right? Relative successful system is like Axie Infinity system, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like the play to earn system functions, right? And if you think about the core loop of the game, right? Like sort of the battle game, like you sending your axes into fight each other and everything, that could be replaced by anything. That could be like Clash Royale. Do you know what I mean? You could
Mm-hmm.
have like
Yeah.
cards as the asset, and then it could be like Clash Royale. It will still work. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like the idea is that like now there's this sort of interchangeable, this like sort of way of building games, or this like system of building games or creating games and having them realize those visions realized, right? And what's interchangeable is your core loop, your lore, your vision, and then of course like different kind of tweaks that you make to the game systems. And like the learning we have from Axie Infinity, we can build build different kinds of games, right? And we might learn that like, okay, maybe it's not entirely sustainable. How about what can we do to make it more sustainable, right? And then the second piece is like I think that's the first generation, right? So we have like sort of this more traditional core gameplay loops, and then like you kind of really lean into building something around that. And then the economic loops themselves are games as well, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
as an XC, John Lai has this excellent tweet where he talks about like Axie Infinity becoming a game where you also play like a management sim, right? So you're, if you, sort of are one of the sort of crypto native folks who like purchase a bunch of Axies and like enjoys breeding them and like optimizing, that's also a kind of game. It's the same kind of drivers that hit like same kind of like almost I want to say like hits the same pleasure points, I suppose, as like idle
Mm-hmm.
games, right? Idle games with like really
Yeah,
deep
yeah.
economies, right? You just like optimize RimWorld, Factorial, those kind of players will enjoy these kind of crypto games, right? It's very pleasing to have things like in order, like function systems functioning exactly as you hope they will, right? And that's a game as well. Like, I think sort of looking at Axie and saying like, well, this is only just a card game. It's like, I think really discounting the amount of work, the amount of like mode they've built around themselves, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's one example. So that's the sort of new types of gameplay that emerge. I think the third is really kind of the third is, well, I can't speak too much on like innovative types of games that exist, but I think more fruitful discussions might, and I've sort of prepared this a little bit, right? But more fruitful discussions could kind of move in the direction of either talking about, I think, funding, right? So we can talk about like how like crypto
Mm-hmm.
helps funding of these game visions, and then I can go into a history of like game monetization, and like the way games are funded as a business, right? And that could be interesting context. The second thing I could talk about is more like sort of community involvement within these games, right? So talking about like DAOs, talking about like how players and creators are now like sort of co-opted within the systems in order to sort of really accelerate the process of developing these, you know, Titanic games, right? It's like a World of Warcraft, like, can be developed by Blizzard and, once in a lifetime, right? And then like there's a whole bunch of like folks who are trying to copy that formula, but then like you can't vary too much from it. And there's no way of getting sort of the funding and the coordination required to generate like a world like that, right? But there's promising ways to approach that from a more decentralized angle, I suppose, right? As a more grassroots approach, as a more like sort of community-led approach to build up game systems that ordinarily would be too um impossible for someone to build within a short period of time, right? So like um I'm thinking specifically of like the developers who have to spend like 3 to 5 years making like their advice that you should build casual games first, build up your war chest for your company, right? And then like maybe in 5 years you can build your dream game. It's like I think what's interesting is like now you can just almost short circuit that process as long as you found like 1,000 true fans, 10,000 true fans, they can be like, hey, we want to see this game, like let's make it, you know what I mean? And I will figure all
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
out. Like you can hire people who know how to do like single shot architecture. They're not everywhere, but you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
yeah, like the point is that you can, it's like the possibility space has opened up, whereas before, you really just spend a lot of time either in indie game jams hoping to be discovered, or
Mm.
hyper casual, like sort of churning out games, or working in another studio and the like. So I do think like it's expanded the possibility space for games quite a bit, and like the way games can be made and funded. Yeah.
Cool, yeah. Maybe let's pull on that thread a little bit before we answer one question, Ryan. So, are there? I guess that idea of funding something with your developers is something I've been thinking about as well. Like how do we co-create something with players, right? And yeah, are there any? I guess are there any current crypto projects you've seen that are doing that? I'm thinking of, for example, the Treasure and Magic, which are,
Yeah.
I would say, a co-creation of the lore with people, right? But maybe let's discuss Magic later. But yeah, are there any other projects do you see that are doing the same thing, or at least trying to do the same thing, right? Wherein they're creating that dream game because of the funding that's made possible by crypto and Web3.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most obvious example is crypto raiders, right? And I can go on this for like hours, but I'll kind
Yeah,
of keep
tell
it
us a
keep
bit.
it
Yeah.
yeah keep it short. Yeah,
Mm.
so crypto raiders kind of it's very different from like sort of the fundraisers that have been happening of recent, right? So I think, you know, the most recent ones are like 70 mil raised with 3 ETH mints, like, and I think with crypto raiders, like it already started with like a 300K kind of mint, right? Which is also very sizable. Don't get me wrong, right? That's very sizable kind of support, like, and you almost can think of this, and this is like a quote from, shout out to Michael, right? If you're listening in the future, but like, you know, he sort of reframed, helped condense this idea, right? Basically, by launching a project, you're performing a service of demand aggregation for the project, right? You're saying, hey, you know, I have this fantastic idea for this world that I want to exist. Here's some concepts, here's some visions, this is my background, this is what I can do, you know, in the best case scenario. And then the savvy, the discerning, you know, they'll come in and they'll be like, well, you know, I want to sort of see this vision come to life, right? And I want to sort of be involved in the journey, right? And so, you know, crypto raiders perform this sort of demand aggregation function for like this kind of like MMORPG world when there really wasn't much else in the market, right? I think at that point there was like probably Star Atlas and X Infinity that was really sort of dominating a new cycle related to sort of blockchain games, among a few others like CryptoKitties, right? So
Yeah.
I think like that vision kind of resonated with a lot of players, and like, you know, folks who, you know, used to play World of Warcraft and now quit because now they have to sort of work 40 hours a week in software engineering job or something. You know what I mean? I don't know any of those people,
Such a
but
common
yeah.
story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, you know, different like adapting like certain mechanics in the idle games and the like to kind of make it a bit more accessible, and then also like capture that, like, hey, does anyone else want to see this happen? And then everyone's like, yeah, you know, I want to see it happen. So they buy the NFTs, right? They become part of the community. They spend time in the Discord, and that's all part of the experience of like being part of that as well. And now the developers have sort of been given this key, right? Which in terms of funding, and then also in terms of like sort of eyeballs, right? So like now folks are kind of paying attention to it, you know. Folks who have worked on, you know, in traditional game industry, they'll be like, hey, you know, like I can do a lot better in certain aspects, right? Because maybe they really executed the tokenomics really well, but I can help with the game design, or maybe I can help with like, you know, the art, right? And they come in, even with the community, like there's different initiatives that, so even moving out of the realm of speculate, like sort of hopeful wishfulness, which is, you know, all great, right? It has happened though, right? I will
Yeah.
say, like, you know, even if the community, like getting them involved in, you know, sort of coming up with the lore, right? Music. I think you can read all about it. Like I'll drop some links there. But like in a really like in a substantial kind of way, right? So using the community as a resource, right? And then also rewarding them for you know, that participation, where you might be lacking as a team, right? Because no one like can do every single thing. Like if not, we wouldn't need each other, so to speak. But yeah, like I think that's really the power of like these kind of crypto games, right? And I think it taps into kind of broader theme of like, you know, no gatekeeping, so to speak, right? So because things are open, right? Then like, you know, game anyone even if they don't have like a 20-year background like game development, they can be like, yeah, I want to make a game, I want to make a cool idea. I like the idea of like, you know, having players from the community make the music themselves, enter the competition, and then like auction it off. And like players are buying, you know, people buy the music because they like the music, right? And they support the music. It's not a speculative kind of endeavor, but then all the proceeds go back to, you know, the creators of the music. So it's like now you
Cool.
basically created a way for musicians to get funded. That's one way, right? So I'm not saying like it's gonna fund like a million musicians, right? But then now like there's more, you know, musicians that are being funded than before. So I think that's kind of like the potential, right? Where like different kind of community members can all contribute to this like one expansive world, right? Lore as well, and the like. So I think
Mm.
that's one example of like how these developers can create this sort of dream game because of the funding made possible by Web3. Because now you have incentives aligned as well, right? Where whenever players kind of trade these assets, these game assets, then some percentage actually goes back to the developers, right? So now all you have to do is kind of keep the game exciting and continue to ship new content for players, right? And refine your core loop so that players enjoy it and have even more fun than before. So you can almost think of the early players as having a stake in the game, right? Of course, they have a stake in the game, like an upside if the game succeeds, but then they also are willing to sort of stomach the development process, all the challenges that might come with it, and help form the bedrock of a community for the game, like a voice of the community for the game, right? And if they're not happy with it, they can leave. They can like sell their assets and they'll be like, okay, I'm out of here. I'm not part of this, right? Yeah. So that's kind of some of the things that I think some of the ways that blockchain and cryptocurrency has helped to transform the way games are made, right? I think in a very kind of visceral way. Yeah. Rather than it being kind of like funding directly, it's like from the community. The community has the ways and ways to redress, right? So there's like public fora for them to speak about the game and the state of the game. There's management of the community that's key to development of the game. There's community director vision even sometimes, right? So that's more magic, but yeah. So I think Jason asked the question: with crypto raiders, are funds directly shared with individual developers on the entire org? So yeah, so with crypto raiders, it's interesting. So there is like I like to think of like blockchain games as like existing on a spectrum, right? So a spectrum between like Web 2 and Web 3, right? So like there's games that are like Web 2.05, and they like might have this concept of like digital ownership and collectibles, right? So example would be like Blanco's Block Party, right? So you can own your NFT, but it never tells you it's an NFT. They don't tell you about wallets. They skip all that process. So now you just own this thing that you can sell and buy. And it's like, cool, that's one side of the spectrum. And the other side, you have Web3 games where like they really lean into the entire like, oh, these are tokenomics, and like you've got like to do decks, you've got to like write solidity in order to play the game and all that.
Yeah.
At a high level, right? And these are kind of like your dark forests and really unlock the full power of like the Web3 stack, right? Like the full potential. Talk about composability of game mechanics and the like. I'll put a little bookmark in that for later conversation. But yeah, like I think the with crypto raiders, and answering your question, Jason, like it's more like a Web 2.5 or 2.6, right? Where like you have this kind of
2.6.
like
It's very particular.
2.67, yeah.
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 So you do have like this sort of core team with hired employees, right? That like are working on it together. They get upside in tokens, right? Typically, right, with these kind of projects. So they'll get sort of a salary and then they get tokens, right? And the tokens represent some sort of stake in the growth of the game, right? And that in practice like motivates people to work very, very, very hard on games. It's very interesting. So I was speaking with another game developer and one of the larger kind of I would say one of the larger like games. I can't name it directly here, but yeah, he was saying how like in the team they work. He's seen these people with like 10, 15 years of game development experience like work the hardest they have in their lives. Like he's never seen someone work like 10 to 12 hours every day on these things. And it's like not a good thing to overwork, right? But just kind of shows like the power of like aligned incentives, right? Like the amount of ownership that not players, but developers will take over different aspects. So with crypto raiders, the funds are like sort of go to the treasury, right? And that treasury is transparent, so like you can see like when it exits and enters the treasury, right? Like, and if you wanted, you could ask questions and people probably answer you like, hey, where did this 20 sort of ETH go or something like that? And you could be like, yeah, this is where it went, right? They'll probably tell you. And there are like sort of different programs that they set up, for example, like grants, right? So they give grants to developers who help build out useful add-ons. So example would be like someone built like an extension, right, for the game. So now instead of playing, like it basically adds like a lot more helpful information around like which is your best install item, stuff like that. So you play World of Warcraft, you remember all the add-ons, right? All of that labor, all of that work that people are putting into add-ons was not really, that created a lot of value, right? Because it straight up like made my game better when I could see how much damage I was doing, and I'll be like, I'm doing a bit more damage than Paul, you know what I mean? Even though I have low gear score. Haha. I mean, like different kind of, no, I'm just kidding. Different kind of stuff like that, right? Like that enhances the gameplay experience in a bit, but there's no way that their value gets sort of captured anywhere, right? And because there's no way that value gets captured, then there's no incentive, for example, for developer like Jason to come in and say like, hey, I want to keep this updated. I'll make this the best and so on. So I think it's really just making this value explicit, right? And then rewarding it, right? And I think like, the major benefit is it doesn't have to be like fully on chain where all this is automated, not at the start. But I do think like important thing to know about Web3 games is that it's enough for it to start with the culture of doing so, right? Because like once you've sort of created this culture of doing so, it's more important than the code, I would say. And it's very controversial to say because like, I know a lot of people say code is low and all of that, right? I think that's the sort of end game, right? But at this stage, like, you kind of want to develop a shared understanding because layer zero is people, right? Like everyone has to kind of buy into the same sort of social contract, understand like, hey, this is when the developers have crossed a line, and so on. And then actually they have the right to leave, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's the kind of I guess utopianisms that I'm kind of trying out in hopes that I have for the space, right? That we don't end up buying 3 ETH mints and instead I kind of support more grassroots projects and able to develop. But all my utopianism speaking. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think
Hope that answers your
that's what's
question.
needed, right? That's
Yeah.
what's needed in the space is people who want to build something better, right? We know that greed exists. People will go to these bits and speculate on them. But if we can kind of design the incentives properly, then we can uh, we can do good with that human drive, I feel.
Mm.
And yeah, I guess something to talk about that as well, Ryan. You're right that I think a lot of the value that is in crypto games is that collaboration and that allowing people to build on stuff. I'm reminded of like modding, for example, like in World of War,
Yeah.
or not in World of Warcraft, but Warcraft 3, StarCraft, like modding.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
where the new genres come out. It's never been traditionally incentivized. It's just people building these things. So if we're
Yeah.
able to drive more incentives for people to do these, then more genres would come out, right? Just because there's a reason to do it, there's a reward for doing it.
Yeah.
um
And
yeah.
there's a reward you can trust, right?
Mhm.
Because like you can in the ideal scenario you might have like really really strict sort of rules they can set, like where code is law and all of that, where based on the amount of views or based on the amount of players and even the amount of time, we've gotten so good at like sort of granularly calculating these things, right? At least in
Mhm.
sort of the free to play world, right?
Yeah.
Right. I think game developers have gotten really good at calculating like day 1, day 7, like like FTU, all the kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
um Using that kind of capability and skill set to help pinpoint like the amount of value that this particular mod like Dota has brought to the ecosystem, right?
Mhm.
And then being able to reward them very granularly for that, being like, hey, you used our tools, we've set up this sort of contract, right? We've set up this sort of set of incentives such that like anyone who gets this crazy amount of views and retention and player spend and all these other things that you might want to track, you might interested in, right, gets a proportional share of whatever you is valuable in the system, right? So I think
Mhm.
like there's a bunch of things you can do that really would supercharge the incentives for creators and you know in the best case scenario help like you know usher in way more sort of innovation in games, right? One, and
Yeah.
then second make games a profession that more and more people can kind of enjoy, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
so I think sort of that's a more selfish desire, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Maybe let's go through some of the questions here, Ryan.
Yeah.
We passed through some of them. From Chris, he says, I guess where's the best place to what's the best place to do sharing ideas and concepts, or to find people to build a game together?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Chris, this is a good question. I think Kernel Gaming Guild might be a nice place, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good place. I think second would be like Twitter, right? So I know like Twitter isn't like everyone's thing, but like I would say like in crypto and games, then Twitter is really quite a space. Third would be, I think, and when I say Twitter, I mean like sort of engaging very actively rather than sort of lurking, right? So examples would be folks who like would retweet, um like quote retweet and then like sort of share their thoughts about like, hey, this is a thought piece that someone else wrote, like this is my distillation of it, right? It's my
Mhm.
summary, this is my additional thoughts on top of that, like this is where I think the play space will go, right? Or like second is like, hey, I think the game design for this is flawed, like here are the ways I would improve it, XYZ, right? And I think sharing those pieces is also like putting out like messages in bottles to the world, right? And I guess the hope is that someone else will pick them up. So it's really that's the second way I think I will go about it if I was sort of in a position where I would like to find someone to sort of build with me. I think third is sort of reaching out and speaking to folks in your vicinity who like sort of are excited and passionate about these things, right? So like, talking about building games and making games and actually making them, and like hackathons, and so like people are actually already doing it, right? So hackathons, I think game jams are really fun. And I think third, of course, is like programs like this, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think these are like optimal places to find people to build things together, right? If you don't already have like sort of folks to build with from like some of your previous work, right? Yeah, I think it is also kind of good to have an understanding of like the different sort of roles that a team might within a team that will make a game successful, right? And then understanding like where you fit in that process, in that role, and then finding folks that you can partner up with, just like sort of any startup, right? Like, in a startup for artists, commit, like, if you're building like let me think, I'm just come up with a random startup example. If you're building like a platform for artists to a software platform for artists to come and sort of jam on ideas together, right? And you probably need an artist on the team, right? You probably also need like a software engineer on the team to build the tech piece of it, right? So I think like understanding like, okay, for games you might need like game designer, you might need a game econ designer, a software engineer to build that piece. You might need someone who can handle the blockchain aspect, and someone who produces the game, the artist. So where do I fit into that picture, right? Of the game development team, right? So I think like that's probably also another thing to sort of clarify for yourself even, right? And then that would help to sort of iron out like where's my value add. Would it be understanding where blockchain can, I've maybe spend like a few months, a few weeks like kind of studying like where blockchain really fits into games, right? So prototyping and testing that with other folks. And then like you're like, well, I want to sort of make this a reality. Then how do I go about that, right? Like I think then you realize that your space probably is like where you're the blockchain mind, right? Where you're the one kind of like spearheading like, hey, this is the design on the blockchain front, right? Like this is where like
Mhm.
sort of
Yeah,
crypto
and
fits into the game, and like this is like the chains we're gonna use and all of that, right? So I think that is that's a key thing to kind of iron out before kind of like hitting out and building something big. Or you can build something really small. You could be like one person and do everything. Um, yeah. So there's a bunch of ways you can go about it. There's no sort of prescribed pattern here. Yeah.
yeah, maybe one thing to ask Ryan. I know you were building crypto raiders during Block 4, right? What was your process
That's
there?
funny.
When how did you build the team together? What was the yeah?
Uh, yeah. So yeah, crypto raiders, how that started, right? So I'm not like, I didn't like found it or anything, right? And I don't claim to have done that, right? But then I was like, building out a lot of like sort of the core gameplay, right?
Mhm.
For crypto raiders. So that my understanding, okay, so the backstory behind crypto raiders is that, and we actually have a podcast coming about this in like a alpha league, I don't know, like in a few weeks. So we're gonna talk
Yeah,
talk talk the sort of founders of crypto
I'll
raiders,
listen to it. Yeah.
a founder of crypto raiders, and like
Mhm.
one of the sort of early tokenomics experts. Yeah. And
Mhm.
basically the founder played World of Warcraft like 17, 18, what am I saying 17? Like 15, 16 years ago, right? Like with his buddy from then, right? And then they kind of went off and did their own thing. They used to play it like a lot, right? Together. And every month they would come back and then like pitch another idea. And then I think they got into the crypto space like 2018, 2017. They
Mhm.
probably tell the story a bit better than me, right? But then like every month they'll pitch an idea and then suddenly they hit on this like, hey, wow, we do like World of Warcraft, but like like it's like way like sort of pixel characters, and like your characters can die. I think that's like sort of the genesis of it, and they were like, yeah, this could be fun. So they went on and sort of started this, and Ray, like when they did an NFT sale, they were like sort of speaking with all of these folks in the community who were excited about it, and then just managed to get on like people from there. Like they didn't have like a network in games or anything like that, right?
Mhm.
Like the obviously they have strong background in software engineering and technology, right? And then also like growth and marketing, and yeah, just like passionate about games in general, but like they didn't need to have like sort of spend like 15 years proving their stripes at EA, to say like, hey, we're gonna build a game that grosses like $5 or $6 million and getting on like people who know their stuff on the different parts that they can do. So getting on software engineers to do dungeon, like game design element, which I worked a lot on, right? Like all of that, like it was something that they got from the community. So I was just like someone who like was like, hey, this is cool. Like I'm down. You know what I mean? Let's do it. You know what I mean? So yeah, then I just like took responsibility for all that stuff. So yeah, I don't claim to have founded it. Just so you know.
No, yeah, but I think of course you're the brains behind the game design, so that's very important
No, like
on what.
I've heard some criticism, so I'm like, okay, gonna stay low. Yeah,
Well, we're in this space where everyone's like outraged at something, right? So
yeah, everyone's
that's
like,
why,
oh, it's not a
yeah.
real game. I'm like, hey, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
The
I know.
gross more than the indie games. So sorry about that.
So,
Yeah, it's like
anyway, yeah, yeah.
no salt intended. I love indie games.
Yeah,
But
me too. Yeah,
yeah,
maybe
it's
we
just
can maybe we can address two more questions here from Salim. One is thinking of play as learning by exploration. Should we think of designing for exploration specifically? I guess I can start with that a little bit. I've seen some games try and do that, like Eternal, right? Ronan Sanford's Eternal. It was a fully on-chain game, like a roguelite, I would say, or actually an actual rogue game wherein you discover the map as you walk around. So the challenge there was like every transaction was an on-chain transaction, I think, so that it became very expensive to run that game. But and of course, Dark Forest as well, right? It's a game which is an exploration game. Well, it's you're exploring, so you can conquer stuff. So, but it's still exploration. So maybe Ryan, is there something you can think of like a game that is designed for exploration, something that would a Web3 game designed for exploration, maybe, because there are a lot in Web2, right? There are a lot of
yeah, there's a lot of
exploration
Web two,
games.
but not much
Yeah.
Web three. I think. Yeah, like this is like, I mean, to go into this would be probably like a whole lecture of conversation. Yeah, but I think
Yeah.
like for designing for exploration, like this is kind of like the topic of like game jams, right, Salim? So I'm not gonna answer the question directly, right? Because I don't think there's a fruitful way to answer that, right? I will say that like with a word like exploration, for example, right? Uh, like there are game jams where they just give you like the stimulus, which is like one word. So they might be like, divide or like block, right? And it's like based on this one word, create like a new game concept, like game mechanic, a new sort of whole game that sort of centers around this mechanic, and then like 500 entries for like this game. So an exploration could be one sort of trigger word that you use, right? Where you're like, hey, how can I create a game that is constrained by this concept of exploration, right? So exploration becomes your constraint on like the type of design space that you're willing to explore. And I think it in that way is kind of a creative endeavor rather than others. And as for examples of collaboration community games, there's quite a bit of like game design literature on that. Like when I say literature, I mean like academic literature, like where they talk about like you know the names of these like designers escape me in the moment, right? Or like sort of like academics who write about these designers, right? But I think you should be able to find. I can share a bit more later in the future, yeah. But like some examples that come to mind are like games that try to use, like for example I'm not gonna like try and like explicate one now, yeah. Like but
It's a fascinating question, like trying
yeah,
out
it is a very
different
open-ended
teammates
question.
in playful ways.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. Sorry
Yeah,
about that.
yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I'm thinking of is of course Among Us, right? Like wherein the
Mm.
teammates change every round in a playful way. But I
Yeah,
guess
or like
collaboration or community games. That's
Mafia, right? Like those kind
mm,
of like werewolf type games where
yeah.
like players do switch sides and the like, right? But yeah, those are, I guess, are more sort of social, like social games. So
Yeah, they're more
yeah,
social than
there's
collaboration or community games. So that's
yeah,
fascinating. I think.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
yeah, uh there's a lot of like games out there in the world. I think there's like millions. So yeah, it's definitely a difficult thing to pinpoint.
That's
But
a lot. Yeah.
yeah, I think if you're interested to learn more about like sort of game design in particular, right, I will recommend the book like game design by Tynan, designing games by Tynan Sylvester, right? So Tynan Sylvester like wrote this book, but and he previously worked on Bioshock Infinite, right? But he's most famous for having designed and built RimWorld. Yeah. So yeah, RimWorld.
Wow. Yeah.
So
RimWorld. I think
yeah, one of my
that's a good
favorite games.
example of
Yeah, a
like
sandbox game with
a
no
sandbox game. Yeah.
particular adjectives. Yeah. So I'll drop metaverses, which is sort of my own was my previously my personal exploration of like blockchain games, right? And like play to earn and play and earn. But I think it's kind of expanded to like just talking about crypto gaming and blockchain gaming in general. Um, I wrote about 6 to 7 levels of it, and some of it while I was in kernel, so it's really a productive time. And yeah, I think it helps to capture a bit of introduction into sort of crypto gaming. Yeah, so don't mind me shilling my own stuff, but yeah, then again, I get $0 from this. It's free, so yeah, it's free sources. So yeah,
Yeah,
please
I suggest
enjoy.
people take a read on that. I think
Lovely though.
it's a very lucid exploration of play to earn, and I think also like play and earn. Actually, Ryan, I think I saw that from you, that term. So I think
Yeah, it's definitely taken over the mainstream now. If you've seen some
yeah,
of the, yeah, it's
yeah,
it's made it. So I'm glad for that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good way to look at games, and I suggest people look at Ryan's Twitter as well. He explores a lot of these thoughts there, and people engage on his Twitter. I guess maybe let's explore one more topic, Ryan, and then we can have some space for Q&A. But as one request was for us to kind of discuss treasure and magic, and I know
Okay.
you've taken a look at it a little bit as well. But
Yeah,
maybe
I've taken a bit of a look at treasure and magic. Yeah,
yeah,
I
let's
will say, okay. So I've boiled my thesis on treasure and magic down into a few sentences. So let me
mhm.
read them out like directly.
Okay,
So
yeah,
I sound a bit smarter than I am. I'm just kidding.
yeah.
Yeah, let me see. Um, right. So with treasure and magic, right? I think the way to think about treasure and magic is so the history of treasure is that it started from as almost like a sort of offshoot of loot, right? It's like, hey, what if we took, instead of like building games from the top down, like game experience from the top down, where like, hey, I'm a game producer, right? I have this vision for like what the game is gonna look like, right? Or the game experience is gonna look like, and now I'm gonna sort of get a bunch of people to help create that vision and make sure that vision comes to life, and then like that play experience, tweak the play experience accordingly, like loot, and then by extension, magic kind of starts from the other way around, right? It's like, well, what are the sort of like minimum primitives that are required to kind of create a sort of satisfying game experience in crypto, right? Like, what would I need to sort of gather that interest and then get people involved in making this thing happen, right? Loot didn't go as far, but then it helped like spawn a lot of like sort of derivatives, I almost would say, or like sort of offshoot projects. I don't want to say derivatives because there's an implication there, but I really like projects that were inspired by loot, right? Like treasure is one of those projects, right? So it really sort of ran with this concept of like, well, what if we had this base layer, this asset, right, where you could build on top of, right, and provide utility to. So it's almost like, again, an aggregation for attention, right? It's like everyone looking at treasure to sort of create something, right? So in a few words, or in a few sentences, I would say magic and treasure DAO is the product of leaning heavily into lessons from the experimentation in DeFi, right? So all of the experimentation we've done in DeFi with like yield bearing assets, with like VE tokenomics, which is like sort of tokenomics around voting. I think that's the sort of clearest way to sort of put it down. And then like using all of these lessons is really like a bootstrapping mechanism, right? To fund and build organic interest in a community governed game world, right? Or game ecosystem. So you're really sort of like funding this world right? The treasure metaverse, as they call it, right? And then you have interest coming into this world, right? And over time, like you get more and more members of your community who are interested to build on top of Magic, right? And then Magic as a token becomes like a very dense token. This is their terminology, right? So they're saying Magic is a dense token with multiple utilities, which then becomes like the base layer for all of these game experiences, all these different experiences that can exist in Magic. And so like Bridge World is like that first kind of experience, right? And to be fair, there's like NFTs that they've created, right? These legions, right? And then they built like this kind of economic game where you can like stake these legions, you can you can place and stake magic with these legions in order to earn more magic, right? You can level up these legions to, yeah. So there's a sort of very basic kind of economic gameplay there, right? But then there's also like support for other NFT projects, and there's a DAO governing like magic and the treasury for which is exactly treasure DAO, right? So I would say like they're really, really strong and really coming in from the Web3 side, sort of harkening to our earlier conversation about Web2 versus to Web3 spectrum, right? Really coming in from the Web3 side, saying like, hey, this is the best of what like Web3 has done so far. All the primitives that we have, NFTs, we've used like tokens, we use V tokenomics, we've designed like very sophisticated way for like supply to deflate over time and all of these things. We use liquidity provision, we incentivize liquidity provision so everyone can get magic when they want, right? But like from the game's perspective, that slows them down, right? Because like they don't have the expertise perhaps on the game development side per se yet, right? So like that is something that you almost see like sort of this bifurcation of talent, right? Where like there's talent on the Web3 side and then there's talent on the Web2 side, and then like they're having some trouble meeting. But I will say that like what's really interesting about Magic is that in a way they are sort of like on the frontier and they are innovating in many ways around like how do you kind of sustain interest in this system, right?
Mm.
Which is going to be really, really helpful for example, a lot of free-to-play games or a lot of like Web2 developers who can like now look to this as an example of how to build such a system or such an ecosystem. And sort of harkening back to our earlier conversation about Axie Infinity, right? Like Axie Infinity showcased to a lot of developers like, hey, this blockchain game stuff is really viable. Like this can like sort of like this blockchain games piece can actually work like in some way, like it's attracted attention somehow. So let's try it out, let's figure it out. And then like they learn about all the primitives in blockchain, then learn about other aspects as well, decentralization, DAOs, community governance, and they get inducted into Web 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.6, 7, 3,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's kind of the idea that we sort of like you, this is some of my thesis around Magic, I guess. This is what I can say. And as for the specifics, I can't really speak to that, Adam. Yeah. So I think I say I do think you can sort of go in to Bridge World, right? I don't particularly fancy like logging into my wallet, on a recording or anything like that. But
Yeah.
you can go into Bridge World and you can like send your assets into like in mine, and they have collaborated with a few projects, right? So as you can see, Small Brains, Small Bodies, Life, some of the earlier NFT projects. These are sort of external teams that have like said like, hey, we like Magic, we like what you're up to. Like, can we build NFTs that use Magic, right? And then they're like, yeah, you can use Magic. You know what I mean? Like, we'll give you attention, we'll give you eyeballs, we'll give you sort of magic, right? And you can use Magic in your game to power all your assets and let them earn Magic as well. So it's like setting up like I guess you can almost think
It's
of
like a
like the
fund, right?
token. Yeah, it's like a fund, right? The token can be, and this is interesting, the token can be like a representation of cash, like money, right? But what's money, right? And then the
Yeah.
second the second thing a token can be is like a way to ration attention, right? Like, so if people are already attentive to Magic and they're interested in Magic, so in a way you're almost like tokenizing the brand value of Magic to these different platform, these different like sort of game projects, right? And I don't think this is something specific to Magic per se. I just think that this is a potential way in which the token can like sort of take on sort of additional utility, additional function, right, within the system. So I think that that's kind of like it does serve as, so all what I'm saying is not like specific to Magic per se, but it's about a sort of a generalized approach that Magic has been putting out, right, into the world for people to kind of
Yeah.
learn from and critique. Yeah.
I guess the main gameplay, to Adam's question, is the bit of the gameplay or the experience is really the mining, right? Like the liquidity pools around Magic, and just buying these NFTs and then staking them and hoping to earn some magic in return. So
Yeah.
there's no video game yet, but
It's an economic type game. Yeah.
yeah.
So you
So
like clicking around, staking, get assets, and the like. Yeah. So am I
mhm.
clear on how they went about building and launching the token, or the DAO come first? It's a good question. Let's see.
Yeah, from what I remember, I think I remember this
Started
launched
with
on mainnet
NFTs.
at the start, right? And then there was a it was a loot derivative, as you mentioned, and then they migrated to Arbitrum. Is that correct, Ryan?
Yeah, Arbitrum, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, which is another layer two chain. So I I actually don't know if the token or the DAO came first. Um,
Yeah.
but the project, well,
It
the loot,
start
the NFTs came before the Magic token for sure,
yeah,
right? Yeah, yeah.
NFTs came first. Yeah, okay. So I'm looking at a Medium article now. It says it's from Treasure themselves, right? So
Mhm.
they said uh it started with the NFTs, then they went to the tokens, right? So there's a way to use NFTs to mine the tokens. Ah, there you go. So
Here.
you have it on the screen as
Yeah.
well.
So they have
Yeah,
a
so
roadmap
they launched
here.
a
Yeah.
token, and then they released the DAO in November. Yeah.
Mm.
So I I guess the
Okay.
thought is
Yeah.
also that like the DAO or NFT governance model. Cool. Yeah. Okay, so I guess the thought is like the token has to kind of exist before the DAO exists, because the
Yeah.
in our current understanding of DAOs, like the token will be the way in which sort of powers, I want to say like governance power, I suppose, which is a very like okay, like governance power is kind of like distributed within the system, right? So like decision making power, how is that kind of spread out amongst different stakeholders? Yeah, it's via the token, and there have been so V tokenomics is interesting because previously, and this is aside and sort of not to V tokenomics, right, in general, but like V tokenomics I think is interesting because if you think about sort of previous ways in which tokens were used to govern DAOs, like tokens, you sort of like uh, straight majority, right? Sort of like 51%, like first past the post type thing. So like 51% tokens um will help you 51% of of like total circulating supply, whatever it may be, right? Or those eligible to vote, then would allow you to pass a proposal, or 66% or whatever threshold that the DAO sets, right? And then I think what V tokenomics introduced. So the problem with the first model was that it's like DAO 1.0, I guess, is that like one challenge was that like all of the main the main challenge, I think, and this is like yeah, the main challenge is related to like how folks who just have money, right? So all of these decisions were sort of able to be influenced purely by economic value alone, right? So I think where VE tokenomics kind of improved on sort of allowing token holders to decide different aspects that are critical to the DAO, so to speak. So uh, DAOs are just about sort of decentralizing decision making, right? Yeah. So like V tokenomics introduced another layer of like commitment, right? So saying like, well, now you have invested some sort of time and money, perhaps, right, to acquire this token, right? Now, showcase your commitment by locking up your tokens for a variable time. So like 6 to 18 months, 24 months, 72 months, whatever it is. And we reward you with an equivalent amount of, also a proportional amount of VE tokens, which then represent voting power, right? So I think like, we'll see more and more sophisticated kind of models for DAOs and DAO governance as we go on, particularly like related to sub DAOs. And I think all kind of like these are all kind of like primitives and tools that are used to help organize sort of work and labor. Yeah, and
Mhm.
I think sort of introducing that VE layers is a nice start. But anyway, I just rambled over VE tokenomics.
No, no. I think that's a perfect example of that all of this is related, right? And
Yeah,
in the next gaming guild sessions, we'll talk about DAOs, how to build a community. So, cause that's important, right? That's what we're working with now. So, yeah,
definitely.
just good to
Yeah.
talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So how do you go about launching a token to raise liquidity? Yeah. So we can talk about that, but yeah, I don't know if like everyone has their own sort of different ways to kind of you do have to gather like attention and demand, right? So I think, the token as any other is like a product that if you want people to sort of invest into the product, like invest into your vision, then you need to be able to sell them on your vision. So I think in the end, it comes back to selling. I will say that there, with tokens, there have been kind of interesting ways, like think outside of the box, right? So Web 2 is like, hey, can I sell you this thing, right? Web 3 is like, hey, can I give you this thing and give you a give you a responsibility and alignment? That's the meme, right? Like, I'm gonna airdrop you some responsibility. Yeah. But like that in the utopian sense is like, wait, hey, ideally I'd be able to give these tokens, like example, if I wanted to get some of the folks who are really passionate and help build up the Axie Infinity community, if I was forming a new game, right, I might say like, hey, maybe I can give some tokens to people who played Axie Infinity in 2017, right? And then 2% of supply might be reserved for them to claim, right? If they claim, then it's locked until they play a certain amount in the game. Once they play a certain amount in the game, they experience it, they want to give their feedback, they want to be part of the community, then it unlocks and they can sell it if they want, right? Because they perform some act of labor or service for your game, right? So I think having that granularity and the ability to sort of play within play with this like kind of new tool, right? It's like, hey, like I can give this away for free, like like I can generate this new currency that might be worthless, I don't know, but like you probably want to make it valuable somehow, right? It's about being targeted and about like sort of thinking like, hey, this is a new way of doing things where I don't have to necessarily sell all the time, so to speak, right? Like it's about sort of incentive alignment more than like making lots of money, even though like it can be used for both. Yeah.
Yeah. So a good question there,
Yeah.
and really
um
a very deep topic on tokenomics. And maybe let's answer this one question also from Kirill Ryan around any insights into designing games based on interaction in virtual twins and the real world physical locations.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, that's interesting. So are you speaking of games that are reflected both in the physical world and the virtual world, so like sort of a one-to-one mapping between like virtual world and physical world? I don't profess to have any insight into making those kind of games, nor have I come across like many successful kind of case studies on those kind of games. So I can't really say, right? I think the closest analog you might find probably is like design of like virtual reality games. And there's like sort of a good amount of literature on designing those type of games out there, right? So yeah, I think that's a very closest answer and the best answer I can give to your question. Yeah, but
Maybe maybe
as
if
for like,
Kirill wants to
yeah,
unmute.
yeah,
Well,
I mean,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
happy to give you the floor as well to clarify.
Yeah. But also, I guess when you talk about real world physical locations, games like Pikmin and Pokemon Go might be a reference as well when physical location takes is some sort of mechanic. But yeah, hopefully that answers your yeah. So Kirill says exactly. So I have seen some people try to tokenize that. I know that the spatial DAO people in kernel have been trying to do something around tokenizing that as well. I haven't seen. I remember some games early on in the, I guess in the ICO era that
Shout
aren't
out.
here anymore trying to do that. So there might
Uh,
be yeah, because there's a clear proof of work there when you're walking around, right? Or proof of gameplay. So there might be a way to tokenize that. I don't know if we should, right? But yeah,
oh,
I think.
okay.
Mhm,
Sorry, it just came to mind. Like,
mhm.
I think the clearest example of like a game that interfaces the real world. I think that a lot of them like AR games, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so there are a few kind of AR games in the market, and then some are more private than others. But I can speak a bit about like Genopets, which is like they call it a move to earn game, right? And so the entire idea is that um the core idea being that you set up incentives such that players will move and like go out and exercise and walk around the world, kind of like Pokemon Go, in order to like progress within the game and then potentially move towards, see what I did there, move towards earning some sort of currency that might be valuable in the real world, right? Which is the entire like sort of X to earn, X and earn kind of yeah, metaphor. So Gina Pets
Yeah,
is
Geno Pets.
what I would
I
take a closer look at.
I
Yeah.
heard of that. Yeah, Geno.
Yeah. So rock on. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Kirill, any games that you enjoy in particular that you like to sort of talk a bit about?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I guess since we also have just a few minutes, we've taken up an hour and a half of your time, Ryan. So thank you for spending it with us. Maybe I can give the
Right.
floor to people who want to hop into the discussion. So uh, yeah, so Kirill mentioned Skyrim, Red Dead Redemption, Major Quests.
I haven't yet played Red Dead. Yeah.
Oh, you
Like
should. You should.
you're like, whoa, what the how dude, this guy says he's a gamer, didn't play Red Dead. Yeah.
You're
I played
gonna
Skyrim, yeah. No,
you're
but
gonna spend a
yeah,
lot of time
that's
there though, like Skyrim. But
yeah.
something to share also, I Zynga is moving to the blockchain, right? And then
Yes.
Take
Yes.
Two acquired Zynga. So
Yes.
with and or not Take Two. Was it Take Two that acquired
Yeah,
Zynga or the
Take
GTA
two.
people?
Take two acquired Zynga, yeah.
Yeah,
Take two acquired Zynga.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Zynga is yes, Zynga.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
we spoke with them quite interesting. I can't say
yeah,
more, sorry. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And then yeah, Adam, you can unmute and I guess join the discussion.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering, can you speak to? Sorry, I was about to run downstairs and I've got you on two devices. So, yeah. This rift in the traditional gaming community with crypto,
Yep.
that we've seen when Discord hinted they might tie up with a wallet, and there was a massive backlash, or when Ubisoft made an announcement. Can you speak to this whole conundrum? Like, my take on it is, I mean, I'm not a gamer, and I've come at this space from NFTs and the arts, and I'm very active with on a social VR platform with a group of people, a community who are building in VR chat and a few other platforms. But from what I can tell, and it exists in VR chat, who've recently announced, anyone so much as tries to promote an NFT on the platform, they're going to get thrown off. And there's hundreds of thousands of people on the platform. But I mean, my take on it is it's that fear of like the commodification of everything, and they feel that maybe it's going to ruin the kind of what they think of is the importance to them of gaming and play. Um, that sort of thinking, and obviously it's fueled by being constantly shilled terrible NFT projects, or
Yeah.
seeing people getting rug pulled and all the FOMO going on, and the theft and the fraud in the space that the mainstream media constantly covers. But is there anything else to it? I mean, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think you did a pretty good job of covering it, like sort of the backlash from gamers, right? I will add that like sort of to kind of go a bit like sort of break down a bit like this hatred. Like I think it's important to sort of like break down into like one, the gamers themselves, right? And you see like these gamers are like kind of more hardcore gamers. So I'm thinking of sort of all the stakeholders around games who are interested in sort of NFTs and development, right? So one, I think mostly hardcore gamers, right? So like these are folks that are used to kind of paying like 60 to 70 for like a box game, right? USD, and then playing that AAA game that was built on the labor of like multiple kind of game developers getting paid like below average market for their, so the game premium, and then like getting fired after the contract ends and the like, right? And then like yeah, but anyway, there's a bunch of stuff like that. I'm not trying to like throw shade or anything, but it's just like there's this very specific kind of like game that they enjoy, and they believe that games, the way games should be made, and therefore like they push back against things like free to play, they push back against things like um all that, which in essence free to play is I think represents about 85 to 90% of like revenue or something like that, and also like total give some ridiculous amount, like you can find the number online, like don't quote me directly, but like I think the point is that like hardcore gamers can be sort of a very uh vocal audience, so to speak, right? Opinionated as well. So particularly, so I think sort of looking past that, and then sort of like seeing like, is there a market for beyond early adopters that we have in our communities, right? And then like can we scale that? I think that's the more important questions that we must tackle before like addressing, I think sort of moving and sort of advancing directly into the hate of like hardcore gamers. Second, I think it's indie gamers, right? I think indie gamers are a bit less less intense about this one. Okay, so that's the first set of stakeholders, gamers. Second set of stakeholders are game developers, right? So people who develop games themselves, right? So I think there's the traditional folks who I think also worried about being disrupted, right? I think the second is like sort of the worry that it will cannibalize their business model, so that their existing business models, right, which function perfectly fine, right? Like, why do I need to change anything? If and then like I don't understand why XYZ. This is my lack of understanding, really. Don't understand why XYZ can attract so much. It must be a scam, right? And like that kind of mentality as well. Like that, like some, and I'm not trying to be like, yeah, I know best or anything like that, right? We're all just trying to figure out like what works, but I think it works. I have like strong kind of conviction on it. So I have like my career on it. So yeah, so like there's a bunch of yeah, like different opinions that people have about this. But then I think Paul probably will speak best to this about like maybe how it was like in free to play back then, right? And probably like a similar kind of sentiment now towards play to earn. I think the third aspect is just sort of general public, right? And in particular sort of game media, right? And game media kind of like reports it's pretty opinionated and doesn't always report in the way that sort of journalism should report, I suppose. But that's my opinion again, right? So like just kind of not being very, very objective and like diving deep into a technology don't really understand. Yeah. Of course, like certain concerns that they raise, more generalized concerns, makes it a very kind of sort of lightning rod for hatred, right? Like one is like, hey, gamers hate the fact that game developers are trying to find new ways to make more money out of the gamers, right? So that's one piece. So history of game monetization is a really big challenge, right? Because free to play, like in Wales, is also a big controversy for a long time. Like whale hunting, I guess you could call it. Horse pants. Yeah, I think horse pants. Yeah, horse armor. Horse armor. Yeah. So horse armor from Oblivion, right? So shout out Skyrim. Yeah, Epic War winning free to play on Wheels, exactly. Yeah, so that's like a very loaded history, right? And then now like NFTs is like the late to like these people, it's like the latest in a set of schemes, right? To part the player with money from their money, right? Then the second I think is like the generalized misunderstanding of like, hey, this is sort of really bad for the environment. And it's like, well, comparatively, I don't know, I don't want to get into the conversation. I think it's kind of hashed out. Right. And then the third I think is just lack of understanding of like the potential utility, right? So like I think we do have to like build out and like prove out these use cases. But I've kind of much preferred, for a while I was kind of in that headspace where like I'm like, oh yeah, how do I kind of address it? How do I think about this? But I think the best kind of way is just like to build it and they will come, right? Yeah, just like sort of like I don't think like Zynga was kind of hanging around like in posting like things on Facebook being like, hey, no, like we're just like you guys and we build these really fun $60 games. We should charge $60 for our Facebook game or something like that. You know what I mean? So I think like it's almost like a similar level of magnitude here. Yeah, that's what I'll say. That's my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I think you already spoke about that very clearly. I think my take on that is there are, of course, as Kernel says, complementary opposites here, right? Like there is truth that the games are becoming commodified because of Web3, but there's also truth then, and it's changing people's lives, right? Like some game developers just want to see the other side, but we've seen artists really break through because of Web3, right? And I think that's what we should enable game developers to do as well. And I think one thing we should focus on is now we have these primitives that we can use to design better. Like if you look at games now, they're actually not very as Ryan said, they're not very equitable in industries, right? Like these games are made in so much crunch time, people paid below market wages to make these kinds of big games. So maybe we can just change that a little bit with what we're doing, focus on the indie developers, as Ryan said, focus on that, building more tooling that allows anyone to create games. So yeah, so that's my take on that.
Yeah, and I
And
think
then
like
Yeah.
for us, but I think Paul's like sort of adding to your last point, right? Like building tooling and then kind of like building ecosystem as well, right? So like shared knowledge. But I think building the tooling and funding the tooling as well is like another challenge that I think funding, like blockchain is really good for funding, right? Because like,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
transparent, it's
Yeah.
open, and if you can fund like the tooling, with things like, Gitcoin, retro grants and all of that, right? Like that's cool. It's like a public good, right? And yeah, I mean, anyway, I'm not gonna show Gitcoin too hard, but yeah, I think that the point is that it's like sort of a larger possibility space than before for game developers, which is a good thing. I think, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess one last question from Kirill. Is there the possibility of new business models that empower game designers to better own their creative content as well as the mod market as well? I guess Ryan spoke to that a little bit with what Crypto Raiders is doing, right? They're funding plugins. I've seen that happen also with Dark Forest. Like the plugins themselves are funded by uh, I guess the Dark Forest developers themselves, along with their funding from OX Park. But yeah, I think there more can be done. And maybe Ryan, is there something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I will say like it might be a function of the market right now. So I will sort of like add a degree of caution to this, right? I do think in principle that there are and there will be kind of ways for resources to flow in the long run, right? In the medium to long run, way like for where the norm has shifted, where resources flow towards like game designers. When I say game designers, I mean like, game designers on, for example, Warcraft 3 or like StarCraft, custom map makers to own their creative content, right? I think like establishing that norm using Web3 is kind of like, a very productive direction that, Web3 games can take, right? And mod market by extension, right? So I will say that like, with development and ecosystems, like largely as a function of like the amount of sort of capital that's flooded into the space, right? And the amount of like interest that investors have and like players have, in investing in these ecosystems, then you have like opportunities for, game developers with just sort of good ideas and the ability to execute to, be very, very, very well capitalized, right? So I'll give you some examples where like grants from Gala Games, right? Where they like offer you multiple $1 million in order
Yeah.
to like build a game, right? You on the Gala platform, and you get to keep the IP after a year, right? And then any kind of profits accordingly after a year, right? So it's kind of yeah, like that's a really big opportunity, right? Like all things considered. Second, like Ronin, right? People have built out all of this like sort of infrastructure for you to come in and build games, right? And then third, like Immutable, or just throwing out some like sort of more rabbit holes to kind of go down, right? But I think I would say like it might be a sort of function of the fundraising environment, or like sort of just the
Mhm.
amount of funds in the space, right? But I think
Yeah.
like what I can objectively say that I don't think there's been a better time for anyone to come in and develop games than there is today. Like
Yeah.
objectively, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah. So, and now that the market's really looking at Web3, right? It's now's the time for us to take
yeah,
advantage of that and build the games that we want to build.
yeah, exactly.
And yeah.
Yeah,
And
sorry.
Mo, I guess Mo,
Yes,
do you
Paul.
want to hop
Yeah, yeah,
on?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I have a very, very basic question. I'm really struggling to understand how X to earn games work. For example, I understand, for example, how play to earn works. Okay, so you play the game and then you breed, and then the value of your characters, the game characters, they go up, and then you can sell them for higher prices, and you can you can earn some money, right? For example, when we look at the Genopet, like the move to earn, or we have other X to earn,
Learn to
get,
earn. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Just very, very, in a basic language, if you want to, make you
yeah,
understand how these work. Yeah.
yeah. No, I can explain. No, thanks very much for the question, and I think it's an important one. Yeah,
Mhm.
so you're asking like sort of why do they work as a system, right? And like sort of
Mhm.
moving beyond play to earn, right? So I think the frame to think about it is like, well, with play to earn, X to earn, learn to earn, move to earn, there's always going to be like at least broadly two parties, right, in this
Mhm.
transaction, because there is a transaction going on in
Mhm.
some way, right, between like the earners, so people who are like there to, who are they're not there to do it, but like, they earn in the system, right? So leaving question of intentionality out of the picture. So they're earning in the system. On the other side, there's some sort of demand side. So there must be a reason why someone wants like the product that they're creating to earn, right? So I think with like move to, then this kind of like goes back to our earlier conversation actually about virtual economies, right? This book, we're talking about like why people want virtual goods, right? So the reason why these systems work is because like what you're saying is that instead of you being the one to create all of the virtual goods, you're creating a system where other people, like the earners, can provide some sort of service or value to other folks within the system who are willing to pay for those services, right? And I think, an example would be like we've like learn to earn, like the reason, I don't think it's like that far away. Like we start with these kind of like very basic kind of systems, and then I don't think it's that far away for us to begin to design systems where like, you incentivize someone to go through like a scholarship to learn how to develop smart contracts. And that's like a productive activity that people are willing to pay for, right? But then it's like you might gamify the entire experience, or learning about blockchain. Like Aurora, for example, like the entire gameplay has been designed around like how do you induct a non-crypto native person into blockchain and learning about what crypto is, right? So I think that is kind of like something that, for example, a player, so investor might be willing to subsidize, right? So that's where like how the system might work. So subsidies from the market, or it might be that like, eventually that value created successfully is able to fund that sort of supply side, right? Supply side of like earners, right? So you can think of the labor and the product that the labor has created, right? The earners create some sort of product that the demand side wants, right? So there has to be a demand side for that product, and it could be demand. So in the play to earn, it could be demand in order to accumulate more cute axes that you can have around in your yard, or you could also be like for you to expand your scholarship operation. There's a bunch of different reasons why someone might want an axie. In the same way, there's a bunch of reasons why someone might want the product of Genopets, and that again ties back to like being able to create demand for virtual goods. So yeah.
Thank you so much. That was a great answer. Thank you.
No worries.
Yeah,
I'm glad I
thank
was
you,
able to answer
Ryan.
your question.
Yeah. And something to note there is virtual goods. The book kind of ties it to basic economics a lot also, right? That's pretty good that we kind of have that historical perspective as well, because we've seen economies work, and we can learn from what physical economies are doing towards what virtual economies are doing.
Yeah, and I will say an aside on, I'm sorry, yeah, thank you for the question. I will say an aside of like sort of physical economies, that brings to mind a nice point from virtual economies, right? It talks about how there's a section where it talks about how like we don't necessarily always want like sort of perfect competition as a market structure in games. Like we talk about like sort of imperfect information as being an inefficiency in sort of markets, right? So like and talk about but like in virtual economies and virtual economy design, you actually want to sort of focus on like the core focus is not like an efficient market, right? The core focus is like creating a fun gameplay experience, right? Like you're building virtual economy so that one, players are having fun, two, players are willing to spend within the economy, right? So I think that change in objective really changes things, and like you can use the basic tools of economics to help like inform your analysis of these economies, but like the fundamental design goals differ, and that's like a core point that the book stresses, right? And what I really like is like the example of like friction in games. So I read an entire like a metaverse level about friction, but I think they put it pretty succinctly. The idea being that in DeFi, and this is like a potential kind of skeuomorphism we might take from DeFi. Like it's like, hey, why shouldn't we be able to trade like this game currency with this asset and have it like sort of be mediated by a liquidity pool, right? And like now, whenever I want to buy and sell this asset, like I can just buy and sell from the liquidity pool, which every player has deposited their liquidity into. Like liquidity between like wood and gold coins in RuneScape, right? Like why wouldn't that be a good thing? Well, the book talks about, like, for example, EVE Online, right? Where like actually the friction of you having to transport goods and services is like part of the core gameplay. Like it sets up the interesting scenarios where like players can conflict and can engage in conflict and cooperation, right? Because there's this additional friction, we have to go out and like sort of find a place to meet up and like exchange the goods and services. And there's like not instant sort of frictionless trade, right? So there's actually an example where like perfect kind of like, markets can actually get in the way of a gameplay experience. Like even I would not be very fine if all you did was like sort of click. It'd be like stock market, right? And yeah, I think that's one side that we've erred too far in with traditional kind of blockchain games. I'd like to see like more blockchain games like introduce more and more like friction into gameplay to enrich the gameplay experience, like, and create conflict cooperation in meaningful ways. Yeah, so that's just like another sort of very long aside. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but that's very valuable. I think you're right, Ryan. Like we're also used to just clicking something and getting a token, right? But maybe
Yeah.
adding travel time for the token, it might be
Travel time
something
for
to
the token.
to make to make uh to make economies more sustainable and more exciting, right?
Yeah, it's like if you had to fight, like if to fight an ogre on the bridge and decide whether you want to spend your last, like, gold coins on a potion or something like that to alchemize it. I don't know, it's like a bunch of stuff you can kind of like dream up, right? Yeah, but
Mhm.
I think
Cool, yeah.
speaking of physical economies as well, I actually like, think a lot. One of the I think this is tying back to like your earlier question on like how Salim's earlier question about like how do you come up with like game ideas, like some new game designs, right? Like I think with crypto in particular, like one very fruitful headspace I like to inhabit is the idea of physical challenges, like real world problems that people have, right? And then like what goods and services do people like perform for each other in the real world economy, right? So like transportation, validation, all that, like those are things that people are, when I say validation, I mean like stuff like let me think about this. When I say validation, I mean like, having a bodyguard or something like that. That's like a form of validation in a sense, right? It's like even if you don't, aside from the security benefit, it's like, well, I'm important enough to have a bodyguard. Therefore, yeah, there's a bunch of interesting like sort of stuff like that. Really sort of like labor, like reasons why people pay for labor and all that. But anyway, that aside, I think like sort of thinking through this frame of like, well, like what is it in the real world that people are willing to pay for? How can I bring those kind of frictions and challenges back into like, the metaverse, so-called, right? And then like use that to design like some sort of interesting sort of mechanic, right? Where players are now willing to pay for things, or like, now you sort of have a very organic demand side, right? For like why someone want this thing, because it's, yeah, like they're willing to pay for it. Like demand is kind of exogenous to to your considerations anyway. But yeah, and that's a whole topic. Sorry. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah,
rabbit hole.
and again, it touches everything, right? Like the moment that you mentioned labor, Ryan, then I kind of remember I did an exploration of platform co-ops as well, right? Because the things we're designing are similar to what Uber and these gig economies have been doing, is incentivizing people, right? So there's something to learn there as well. Like what is labor? How do we incentivize labor, and how do we make it equitable and fair, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Like make it non-coercive. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. How do you
How do
make
we
labor
make
fun?
labor fun? I don't
Oh
know.
man, yeah. No,
Seems like they're two different things, like work and fun, right? So is
yeah,
there a way to do that? That's a very deep question.
yeah.
And
Like
yeah,
I
eh,
think optimally, like, the utopian vision is that we can kind of create like a creator economy where like everybody is kind of like creating stuff for each other, and like, everyone, basically the vision that communism is
yeah,
had, like without all of the, like the crazy stuff going on. Okay, this is not a good look, but you know what I mean, right?
yeah.
Yeah, like they talk about like having a world where like people can do whatever they want, and like, sort of like provide value to society, and like utopian kind of world where like people spend more time doing the stuff that they want to do rather than less. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I think that is it's a good world. I'm
Yeah.
not, yeah. I probably should not mention communism, but
it,
yeah,
it is a vision, right? It is at least moving it a bit closer to this
Yeah.
utopian vision rather than to the capitalist vision that or the
Yes.
capitalist environment that we are in.
Do cut out that from the recording, please. Yeah. I don't want to talk
No,
about
it's
yeah.
fine. It's
It's
fine.
funny.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and then I guess like we can start winding down. There are a few communists here in Kernel starting very good conversations. Actually, as Salim said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I guess I wanted to add, Ryan, if you didn't know, like the writers of the virtual economies book, Lidan Verta, at least I think they're very anti-crypto, right? Did you know that?
That's funny. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a lot of people that are anti-crypto, but
yeah.
I think I think it's one of those like sort of scissor statements. It's very hard to
Mhm.
kind of get any folk from the other side like to agree with you. It's just kind of like let the cards fall where they may kind of view, right? Like
Mhm.
and like in a year or two, like someone will be more right than the other person, and then like it's a very odd kind of, but I think one solace we can take is that it is kind of a falsifiable hypothesis, right? So like either way, so like either crypto dominates like games, not dominates that, right? But like has a significant role to play in the future of games and create the economy, or it doesn't.
Mhm.
And if it doesn't, then like we move on with our lives and we learn some cool stuff about incentive design, right?
Mhm.
But if it does,
Mhm.
then like we're like, you want to start doing this stuff now or what? Like, we can teach
Yeah.
you. You can join Kernel Block 12 or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that Block 12. Yeah, that will
Yeah.
be like 3 years from now. But
Yeah.
I guess thank you, Ryan, for the time. You've spent almost 2 hours with us, and we really appreciate it. And yeah, and for the other kernel folks, the next sessions will be talking about more around architecture and how we can kind of design these spaces or these web apps more resiliently. And I think we've discussed that a little bit on some of the juntos, but this would be with someone who really built it out. And yeah, so I'll stop the recording now. But Ryan, thank you for joining us again, and of course, I'm glad to see you again.
Yeah. I'm
It's
glad to see you guys too.
everyone's been
See you
pretty
too, Paul.
busy here in this space, so it's good we're able to spend some time together.
Yeah. No, I'm glad we got to sort of set aside this time as well. And it's very fun. Yeah. And